Good evening, everybody. It's been a while since I've done an actual film review, but I decided to look on Tubi for some really old or obscure horror films, and I recently found this film called POV. It came out 11 years ago in 2014, and what drew me to this film was it was shot completely in first person. It was kind of like a horror movie version of Hardcore Henry, where in Hardcore Henry, everything is shot from the first person through Henry's eyes. The same thing is from here, and even though I've heard of other movies that have done that, such as the Hotel Inferno series, I have never been able to find a copy of that film. So to find a movie like POV where it's shot from the first person, and I was actually able to find it on Tubi, it was great to see that. The movie itself was average, which I was kind of expecting that. I wasn't expecting it to be like The Godfather, but shot from a first person perspective. I wasn't even expecting it to be like a mind blowing horror film. And what they did with the whole premise, where the main character, Zach Drake, I think his name is, the premise where he's having this sort of party in an old abandoned house, and he starts hallucinating and seeing demons. That was a pretty average premise, at least in my opinion. But the fact that you see through Zach's eyes, since it's first person, I think made the premise a little bit more unique, where you actually see what he's seeing and seeing things play out exactly from his perspective. So, starting off with what I think is the good things of this film, I do truly like the whole concept where it's shot in first person, where you are completely following the guy. Oh, you're completely following the main character's movements, kind of like in those first person shooter games, or even in Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8. Those are the only two Resident Evil games that I've played. And the main reason for that is because it's in first person. To me, I think it makes the story more engaging and more immersive. In fact, I was watching this movie through the Tubi app on my Xbox, and I decided that I'd make it a little bit more immersive by turning off my soundbar and just putting in my headphones so that I could hear the movie through there. And not only did using the headphones make it more immersive, but it actually the fact that I could hear the audio depending on which headphone I was wearing actually made a difference in there. Where, say, if Zach was hearing some kind of faint noise that was coming from behind him and to the right, I could hear it in my right headphone, and while on the flip side, there's some moments where where Zach is trying to call the police, and he's holding the phone up to his left ear, and I could hear the phone dialing through exclusively the left speaker headphone. And I don't know if that was intentional or anything, but I thought that was amazing. It made the film to me, it made it more immersive. I'll be honest, there's not a lot of positives that I can say with this film, though. Like, purely from a filmmaking standpoint, taking away the fact that I love the idea that it was shot in the first person. That's why I always try to do with my short films, whether I make something that is completely in the first person, or if I just like sprinkle that in there as just an intro shot, or intersplice it with a few other shots. Like, I'm doing a short film right now where the first 10 or so seconds start with a first-person POV shot. But aside from that whole camera choice, there's not a lot of positives that I have with this film. There are a few funny moments in there. There is some humor to break up like the horror and monotony. The acting is okay, especially with the secondary character. I believe his name is Sam, who is supposed to be Zach's brother. He's all right for the first half of the film. For the first half of the film, he kind of acts like an annoying frat brother at times. Sometimes he acts a little bit over kind of dramatic. But then during the second half, when Zach is starting to hallucinate and seeing everyone as demons, Sam almost basically becomes the main antagonist. And the way that he chases Zach around and actually roughs Zach up, that I actually thought that was pretty intimidating, especially with the way that he was talking and the way that he was like stomping over towards him. Going back to Resident Evil Biohazard, it kind of reminded me a little bit of how Jack Baker acts in the game, which is kind of ironic because this game technically came out 3 years prior to Resident Evil 7. But my point is, his character was alright, or at least he became better in the second half of the film when the horror actually starts, which I'll get into that later. Aside from that, and aside from a few funny moments that actually did make me laugh, there are a few effective jump scares where it's not just a loud noise that happens, which, by the way, there is like very sparing music in this film, because after all, it is a first-person POV. But there are a few good jump scares in here, which is something that I didn't think I'd see. As is with the fact that this is a first-person shot film, there are a few very well hidden cuts. Like there are a few moments where Zach closes his eyes and like opens them to a different scene, and like that's all well and good. But there's a few more scenes where it actually has a pretty good transition where Zach trips and falls on something, and then suddenly he's in a completely different location, or it's like a hallucination or a memory, and they do it so quick it's almost hard to see where they did the exact cut of the shot, and I thought that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, that's pretty much it. I mean, there is a decent fight scene between Zach and Sam at the very end of the film, where it's basically Zach getting thrown around, and eventually he has to defend himself with a weapon. That was okay. Aside from that, there's really not much else that this film has to offer. Like the main thing that this really has is the fact that it's shot in the first person, kind of like what Hardcore Henry did. So moving on from that and on to the bad stuff, and yes, some of this stuff is a little bit petty, but other things stand out more. Like, the first thing I noticed was the very first shot of the film is Zach talking to himself in the mirror, and within 5 seconds I could immediately see that it was green screen, and it was unfortunately not exactly good green screen, and it got even more obvious as the little monologue he was giving himself went on, because sometimes the GoPro camera would shake, which again, like, sometimes the GoPro itself is kind of obvious because the shadows that they were casting off were not really aligned to what the actual person would be. But going back to the green screen real quick, there were times where the GoPro was shaking, but the person in the mirror wasn't moving, or vice versa, where the actor in the mirror was moving but the camera wasn't. And then when the monologue finishes, the actor who plays as Zach, like, turns his head to the left, but the camera is still there for like 2 seconds. And the only reason why I'm mentioning it is because it happens more than once. They don't use green screen a lot since most of this is practical. But the times that is used, unfortunately, if you look at it hard enough, it's unfortunately noticeable. Where, like, say someone's reflection is not acting in the way it should. Like, even if they're not possessed by a demon, it just looks wonky. And speaking of the camera shakes, that's another nitpick where, again, I know that it's a GoPro that they're using, or like some other kind of camera, but that a lot of times it has these like unnatural shakes, and I don't know. Usually when I'm thinking about how I move and how I turn my head, like, I know that my eyesight doesn't shake when I do it. At least it's perceived as smooth. There's some exposition that happens. Some of it is interesting, like the whole backstory about how the house became condemned or whatever. That was okay, especially when they were talking about that old fable where the guy who owned it was cursed and he was seeing demons, so he basically gouged his own eyes out, but apparently he could still see the demons or something like that. That was pretty cool. It kind of set the story for what was going to happen with it. There's other times, like the very first extended sequence in a car where the characters are just talking about some frat boy stuff. Eventually, that just got boring, and I found myself just looking at my phone, waiting for it to be over. Which unfortunately that goes with my next point, that the movie plays out for the most part in real time, which sometimes this isn't noticeable, but other times it is, where Zach, the main character, is getting chased around by demons, and you can see it's still light out. Where personally, I think that it would have been way better if it was like shot at night or something. I don't know. Maybe that's just me thinking of like regular horror movies, how when they're shot at night or like in enclosed spaces without natural light pouring in, it just looks creepier. Whereas in the daytime, you can perfectly see what is going on. Going hand in hand with the dialogue, some of the characters are just straight up boring. Like, I don't even remember the names of over half of the characters. Like, you got Zach, you got Sam, which I think Sam is the best acted character in the movie, and even that isn't saying much. You got this one character named Ramona, who I think is supposed to be Zach's girlfriend. and this other character named Lizzie, who, going on about her a bit, she's easily the worst and most annoying part in the film, at least until she gets possessed by a demon. And I just found her character, and especially the way she talked, was just grating. The acting itself is all over the place. Again, going back to Zach's brother Sam, there were times, especially when he got possessed, where he actually seemed intimidating. But basically everything before that, I don't know. It sounded like he was trying too hard, or he wasn't trying enough, or he was just downright annoying. I forgot to mention earlier, the special effects are decent, at least for the demons. I mean, it's not anything that I was really expecting a whole lot out of. Like, it's mostly just people with their eyes gouged out, or people that look like they're severely burnt. But there's also a documentary of this film that, as of right now, I have not watched yet. But it was described that this film was no-budget production. So for what they had to work with, I thought it was impressive enough. So my expectations weren't too high. Another thing that I did want to touch on is that, unfortunately, some of the kills are off screen. And when they are on screen, like, they're not exactly inspired. Like, somebody gets smacked with a sledgehammer and then they just fall over dead. Another person gets shot in the face. You hear some, like, chewing, like demons are eating people, and that's really it. There's not a whole lot of blood and gore in this film for people who like the carnage candy, as some people call it. Going back to what I was saying about the natural light stuff, the lighting itself feels pretty generic. Sometimes it feels washed out, and I don't know if anyone color graded the film, but I don't know. It just feels like it just looks like the raw footage that I usually have from my own cameras before I put it in a video editor. And lastly, I don't know if this is. Lastly, I don't know if this is a bit of a nitpick or anything, but I saved it for the end, fittingly. But I feel like the ending was a little bit predictable. Like, I'm not gonna say exactly what happens, because part of it was a little bit surprising, but not really. But the way that this film ends, like, I could kind of see it coming from a mile away. Like, not every single minute detail, but basically ever since one of the characters decided to do that exposition dump about how the house was cursed and the previous owner was seeing demons, so he gouged his eyeballs out, and also seeing the poster on Tubi with essentially the main character with his own eyes gouged out and the letters POV just carved into his forehead. I already knew how the film was going to end, and it ended almost exactly how I thought it was going to. Not every detail was exactly how I thought it was going to be, but, like, broad strokes, I basically ticked off almost every box that I had. So I don't know if that's exactly a bad thing, because there's a lot of films where I can kind of figure out how it ends, but this one just felt way too obvious to me. So all in all, I think this was a pretty average horror film. I kind of enjoyed it a little bit more than Hardcore Henry, mostly because, like, horror movies are my favorite genre, and I love the first-person perspective that this film did. I mean, I liked it in Hardcore Henry as well, but the thing that I've always tried and I've always wanted to do was make a horror film that was in the first-person perspective, and I really like that this film actually did what I've wanted to do for a while. Like I've done this in some short films, and at least used elements of it again with the intro 10-second shot for some other horror films. But but these guys actually went out and did an hour-and-a-half long film, completely shot with a GoPro, and if nothing else, I commend them for that. So I'd say this was a decent horror film. It's great that they were able to shoot from the first-person perspective. Unfortunately, I didn't like the acting all that much, save for one or two actors, and also the fact that this film kind of drags in the first half, and it really starts picking up in the second half when the possessions actually start. So, would I recommend this film? Maybe. You kind of have to have a really, really unique niche for something like this, kind of like what I have right now. That's kind of what drew me to the film in the first place. But if I wasn't really interested in first person films, then I probably wouldn't have watched this. So if you like how horror video games like Resident Evil 7 are in the first person and you think it's more immersive like I do, definitely give this film a shot. If you kind of like the traditional method where it's always shot in third person, and how like a lot of video games are shown in the first person, then maybe don't watch this film. Because again, even despite my, I wouldn't say bias, but even despite my excitement that this film was completely shot from the first-person perspective, there was still a ton of issues that I had with the film. But that's it for this review, and I will see you guys in the next one. Whenever that is, I don't know. But bye, everyone.